So I grew up in one of the biggest council estates in Europe. We witnessed a lot of violence from a very young age, being taught how to break down drugs, and then before you know it, you're trafficking drugs around the country. Guns are being kind of kept in the flat, drugs are being kept in the flat, and violence amongst the gangs are just escalating. And not only are we being criminally exploited, majority of young women are being sexually exploited as well. And then I turned 17, and then that year was when my life kind of literally spiraled. A shooting happening outside of that flat. That night, I just had a feeling that something bad was going to happen. I had this anxiety in my stomach. As I opened my sister's front door, there was just these 4 policemen standing there, but they was just like, yeah, we're arresting you for assisting in murder, possession of ammunition and Class A drugs with intent to supply. So I grew up in South East London on one of the biggest council estates in Europe, Aylesbury Estate. My family life was quite chaotic. We witnessed a lot of violence from a very young age. My mum was in an abusive relationship for as long as I can remember, really, during my childhood years. And yeah, she struggled with her mental health as well quite a lot. And I guess she was coping with her own traumas in a quite unhealthy and toxic way. She used to drink a lot. I coped with that through reading. That was my form of escapism as a child. I loved Harry Potter. I read the whole series as a child, and I still have that collection, which means a lot to me. And that helped me kind of imagine a life outside of the life that I was given. There was a huge shift in my behaviour from about the age of 11. My mum had to flee to a women's refuge because of the domestic violence and the abusive relationship that she was in. And she didn't take me with her, she only took my younger brother. So I went to go and live with my older sister for a period of time, and then I found myself being arrested. We had arranged a house party in one of my friend's homes. Her mum had gone on holiday. And we ended up fighting with some girls that came to the party, and we got arrested for it. And that case led us to go into the youth courts, and my sister came to the court and just stood up in court and was just like, she ain't coming home with me, basically. Do what you guys have to do with her, I'm gone. And then she walked out of court, and that day I was bailed to local authorities, which meant I became a looked after child. I think once I was permanently excluded from school, which was kind of, the only place I vaguely felt safe every now and again, that was it. It was kind of a done deal. I started kind of forming relationships with other older peers that were in the estate that my children's homes were in. And before I knew it, I was engaging in a gang lifestyle. I wouldn't necessarily say that we had that mindset at that age. For me, it just felt like survival. And it started off, I guess, me being taught how to just break down drugs. And then it led to, do you want to take the drugs from A to B? You'll be able to get paid more. And then before you know it, you're trafficking drugs around the country. And then with that comes gang violence. So back then, when you were 16, you would leave the children's home and you'd go to a trainee flat where you don't have to necessarily pay rent and water bills and stuff like that. But it's about you proving, can you cook? Can you, live independently before you get given your council flat at age 18. So I was given my flat, and then before you know it, guns are being kind of kept in the flat, drugs are being kept in the flat, and violence amongst the gangs are just escalating. So it led to a shooting happening outside of that flat. And I guess that was the first turning point where I realised, okay, this is a serious lifestyle that I've got myself into. So I went back to social service and was just like, I think you guys should move me out of that area. So they just moved me basically to the other side of that borough. And then it wasn't long before another shooting happened outside of that house. And then I turned 17, and then that year was when my life kind of literally spiraled. That flat that I was in was raided by the police. That night, I just had a feeling that something bad was going to happen. I had this anxiety in my stomach. So I just packed my bags and then ran to my sister's house. And then the next day, I remember I was going to do a county line job for one of the guys, and as I opened my sister's front door, there was just these 4 policemen standing there, but they weren't in uniform, they was in like suits and stuff. And then they just backed me into the flat, and then they was just like, yeah, we're arresting you for assisting in murder, possession of ammunition and Class A drugs with intent to supply. I would say I was numb, and I was scared because I didn't understand what assisting a murder was. I was given bail and had to sign on in the police station. And of course, I reverted back to the people I knew and the lifestyle that I had adopted. And then one day I was going to do another county line job. And then once I kind of reached our destination, it was probably about 20 minutes before, I was surrounded by police and arrested again for possession with intent to supply. And then I was remanded to HMP Holloway. For me, being in prison was the first time that I got to really like exhale and just be still and evaluate and connect the dots for myself. I found solitude was like my best friend. Thankfully, I was acquitted of assisting in murder and possession of ammunition, and I was only charged with possession with Class A drugs with intent to supply on 2 separate accounts. And so I pleaded guilty to those 2 charges, and I received a 4-year custodial sentence. So back then in Holloway, if you was between the age of 18 up to 21, you'll be classed as a YO, and so we was in a separate part of the prison to older women. And I was exposed to, I guess, a lot of girls used to self-harm as a way of kind of coping with their trauma. And I started to talk to the girls that were self-harming and like figure out like what was actually going on internally for them, mentally and emotionally. And it really helped me like rationalize my own pain, because I'd realized that like, although I didn't have the family that I always wanted and didn't have the type of parents who were showing up for me or who was raising me, they had parents who like, you know, groomed them into prostitution, who, you know, showed them, who encouraged them to take drugs at the age of 10, 11 years old. And to me, that was like a lot worse than what I had experienced as a child. I found myself useful in those conversations. People didn't understand the unique challenges of a young woman growing up in a certain environment and engaging with the criminal justice system, you know. And we enter lifestyles of crime, and not only are we being criminally exploited, majority of young women are being sexually exploited as well. You know, majority of young women are being sexually assaulted. I really wanted to create this space, and when I came home from prison after doing 2.5 years, I just wasn't gonna shut up about it. So leaving prison, I felt quite like uncertain, being given like, I think it's like £55 or £60 that they give you at reception, and then you're on your way, like with all your stuff in your bags. Eventually bidded for a flat and then moved into my permanent flat. And then a paid role came up for an organisation called Catch 22. So I went for that role. And I think this was like, I guess the moment that I felt like everything I had been through was gonna make sense for this moment. I went through that interview process kind of the best way I could, and I wasn't offered the role, which made me quite, I would say that was probably the first time in my journey where I felt depressed, I felt sad. Another role came up, and it was for a role in a therapeutic home, which was the first time that I'd ever come across an organisation actually implementing these therapeutic approaches that I'd read about. And it was a 9-bedroom unit for girls only who had experienced multiple forms of trauma, and as a result had been put in secure units because the community couldn't address their behaviour patterns, or they had been hospitalised because of their coping mechanisms. To my surprise, it was for an organisation that gave me my first flat when I was 16. And I said, okay, I said to myself, like, it was a bit of a test. If I go into this room and, you know, this gentleman who knows me when I was a young woman doesn't recognise me and can see who I'm presenting myself as today and not my past, I'm going to continue on this journey. I ended up getting the interview, and sat in front of him, aced the interview. Eventually he called 3 weeks later and he offered me the role. And on that phone call I did confess to him. I was just like, oh, do you remember? You know, and I said my old name. And he was just like, oh my God, I always wondered what was gonna happen to you. And I always knew he was gonna come back and turn it around. And I ended up working for him for about 3 years, and that was the start of my career. And once I kind of got into this home, everything that I had researched, everything that I had been exposed to up until that point, all the seeds that had been put in me in terms of Daddyless Daughters was just affirmed constantly, again and again and again. So Daddyless Daughters is a non-profit organisation that I set up to provide physical and emotional safe spaces for girls and young women who have been affected by family breakdown, abuse or adversity. We support girls between the age of 11 up to 25, and we do that multiple ways. So we provide like one-to-one and group trauma-informed mentoring programs. We deliver trauma-informed training to professionals and practitioners. We also do creative expression projects, which is about us providing a platform for our young women to articulate their experiences. So Daddyless Daughters has been incorporated for 4 years now. And to date, we have supported 350 girls and young women and trained over 2,000 professionals and practitioners. I guess working with these young women has helped me to be more compassionate to the inner child in me. Because I rehabilitated myself, I had to take a lot of accountability for the decisions I made. And then that put me in a place of judging myself a lot, feeling shameful for the decisions that I made. And it was it kind of didn't make me feel good about myself. But the more that we work with these young women, it encourages me or helps me to give the younger me the compassion and the empathy that I needed but I lacked at that age, and kind of just affirm that you was a child, you didn't know any better, you know, just giving me that conversation and that language that I can have with my inner child that I wish was had with me at that time. And then kind of practically, sometimes when I kick into CEO mode or business mode, and they ground me and they help me, they remind me that this is not a business, this is community work, we're working with people, it's complex, they help to kind of humanize all the bureaucracy that it takes to put together the type of organization that I'm trying to craft, I guess. We have big aspirations as an organization. We're actually in the process of setting up 2 housing projects for care experienced young women who are engaging with the criminal justice system between the age of 16 to 25. Yeah, every year we're working on major projects that, you know, we hope can meet the needs of our community and the girls that we work with, and in an innovative way. So I feel quite empowered that it's working, but still the road is long and there's still a lot more work to do.